This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FY Investment Group and your host of Washington Calling, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, we are fortunate to have a distinguished guest, and her name is Dr. Maina Chawla Singh. She's an academic, researcher, consultant in higher education with several years of teaching experience at University of the United States, India, and Israel. Dr. Singh has conducted field work among several diaspora communities. She's the author of several books. Since 2009, Dr. Singh has taught a wide range of multidisciplinary courses at the American University in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Dr. Singh, for coming to also, and welcome to our show.
Thank you. Good evening, my time. Good morning, your time. And Adab, Namaskar, Sat Sri Akal. Wonderful to be here with you, Frank. And I'm thankful to the South Asia Monitor for reconnecting me with you since our days in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Very nice. Very well. So, Dr. Singh, your work spans 3 countries, United States, Israel, and India. Would you be kind enough to tell our audience the common features and distinction to the education system of these countries? I'm sure our audience will be interested. What is unique about the education system in India and the United States? As you know, the American education system is set at the state level, not at the federal level. India has the world's largest school system, but there's still a gap in the participation of the minorities, as with the lower caste, and the rural areas. So shed some bright light on these.
Thank you. It's an important question, and it's true that I have taught in classrooms both in all the 3 countries. My experience is much less with the school system, so I will be speaking from the higher education perspective. That's where I've done hands-on work. So I want to say the first thing that strikes me is that they're all 3 very strong education systems. They all have a lot of emphasis on research. So in spite of the many internal differences in levels of education within India and different standards, we do have very good research. As you know, Israel is a startup nation. And what can I say about the US? It's always produced really cutting edge research. So I think that's a very important commonality between the 3, that there is a lot of emphasis in society as well. There's a section in each country that really believes in higher education, really believes in research, and pushes each generation to the maximum, to optimizing whatever opportunities there are. And as you can see, all the 3 countries have amazing outcomes, although there is unevenness. So US, India, and Israel, all 3 produce some amazing scholarly and intellectual work and have amazing institutions, whether it's the few IITs we have or the many other institutions that exist, or the research institutes in Israel, in that small country. Many of them also have really amazing research. So I want to say I see that as a commonality. Those are the factors which I think the 3 systems share. Let me look at the differences a little bit. So first of all, it's very hard to compare because the scale is so different. The US is huge and is very well funded, and India is huge and there's poor funding. So the right. opportunities will definitely vary. I have to say that I know from my own experience that even within the US, there's a lot of difference within the country between the institutions. There is the Ivy League, and then there is also the community college.
Yes,
and all of them serve important purposes, but they're not the same. They're different levels. Yes. And I also know that, for instance, if we have rural Chhattisgarh, you also have South Dakota, where the standard of education may not quite be the same as in Massachusetts. So I want to say that I think the scale is one very important thing. So for Israel, scale doesn't matter. It's a very small country. Yes. The education is state funded and its penetration is fantastic. So I think there are differences here in terms of scale, which lead to very different outcomes. You did touch upon how there are segments of society which are excluded or on the margins.
Yep,
I think that is something that is true of both the US and of India. And I think the important thing is not to disregard it, but the fact that efforts are on both in terms of civic society, nonprofits, and the state to embrace as many segments as possible and to reduce inequities.
Very well said. As I understand, you're currently working on an edtech startup. What are your thoughts on the impact of technology on education in years to come? I wanted you to talk about the impact of technology in education that provides the richer learning, and also the fact that it provides safety, boosts productivity. Do you think it has been effective? And what do you think the future of the K through 12 education, do you think is headed to the digital?
So I think the pandemic has provided many answers to this already. That 2 years ago, if we had this conversation, we would have been saying, yes, more and more institutions need to adapt this and move with the flow and tech and so on. And then the whole world was catapulted into this situation where it was like do or die. And even across Harvard, there were only 20-30% of their faculty who were totally comfortable with using tech. But at the end of these 2 years, there's been lots of experimentation. There's been a lot of problem solving. And I think we have just moved to an explosion of solutions from the digital world to be able to see what we can do about closing the gaps, about providing learning outcomes. I don't know that the results have been fantastic, but I have to say that there's been headway of a kind that we had not imagined to have happened so quickly. So I think as the pandemic threw up challenges, the challenges are also of inequity and unequal access, and that's for sure. Now, I was just listening to something just a couple of days ago by 2 or 3 very well-known NGOs who work in India across underprivileged backgrounds and rural backgrounds, Pratham and a couple of other organizations. And they were speaking about how wonderful the access has become. They were saying that now they need to work more on the learning outcomes because they know that kids were able to listen to things and read their lessons, even if it was on a small mobile screen. There were NGOs that tried to distribute tablets. So access is moving very fast. The learning outcomes are now a problem to be solved through more technology. I'm actually optimistic. I'm optimistic that some of the other unicorns that are going around doing things, somebody will come up with something and we can look forward to better, more equity in this.
You look at the brighter horizon when you endure a storm. So let's talk a little bit about it and shift the gear. You're a consultant in higher education with a focus on studying abroad. How do you see the future of flow of Indian students in the United States? As you know, the flow of Indian students in US has slowed considerably for the last 5 years. And as you also know, the Indian student contributed close to $7.5 billion to the United States economy in 2017. But because of the increased cost in the American campuses and because of the also immigration systems, now those students are going more to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and also to Germany. Shed some light on this, Dr. Singh.
Thank you. I think what you mentioned about the timeline is really important. I had some statistics with me that there's been a decline from 2017. There's been a decline by 2021 by 13%. Right. So the 2017 report was speaking about students in the US being like 186,000 something. And then in 2021, the Open Doors report has spoken about 167,000. And you are right that there is, I'm working with I'm an advisor with a study abroad edtech company, which is a startup just for the last 5 years. Everybody, all my colleagues, everybody I work with is dynamic and amazing and 25 years old. And so it's been a learning experience for me because I work on the academic content. I know from the registrations and the conversations there that yes, students are asking for Canada, they're asking for the UK. You're absolutely right. What happened was the US has been traditionally a very highly popular destination for students. You know that your own cohort, so many of the IITs and the scientists, everybody went, and it remained that because of the opportunities.
Yes.
And then when the visa issues came up during the Trump time, there was a huge issue. People were worried, will they have the extended stay for work? How will they pay back their loans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That became an advantage for Canada and UK because the UK fees are much lower, the costs are much lower, although the cost of living might be a little bit higher. Canada became attractive because it was among the first countries to make the work stay visa much more welcoming at a time when we were dealing with Trump's policies. So I think all of that converged. Having taught in the US and been at maybe 25 institutions as a guest speaker, having been inside them, I know that there's something very powerful about the higher education offerings across the US, regardless of whether somebody wants to aim at Georgia Tech or at a middle-level university in Indiana, it doesn't matter. But the kind of education they get, the kind of exposure they get is tremendous, and they know that. Also, there's something very attractive about being able to settle in the US, which I don't know if Canada is going to be able to replace. I do think that the immigration issues and the travel restrictions are going to continue to be a really important hampering fact. So I would leave it at that and say that I think much depends on the policies now.
And I hope the policy do change because we need those students, Indian students into our country. I am a good example of who embodies the American dream and who came as a student long years ago. And there are so many of them. So, so what we want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on the growing political engagement of Indian Americans in public life as well as in Biden administration. Do you think Indian Americans can help India achieve its fullest potential? As you know, it's America that has provided them letters of opportunity to succeed. Those are the values and qualities of America that all of us can proudly and truly embrace. It's not filled with hatred and bigotry, it's inclusive. It didn't used to be that way, but it is now. And India can learn some lessons from that. So my question to you is, do you think Indian American experiencing unprecedented political success? But it is a recent phenomena, and we have a lot of friends in the House, especially, and you know, even the Vice President of the United States is of Indian origin. That doesn't happen in India because there's only one minority in the cabinet of India. So India can learn something from the United States as well.
You know, India is not an immigrant nation. And I think that's something that we need to underline.
Well, but we all immigrant, we came from somewhere.
I know. But the recent history of migration into America and the fact that it was constituted in that way creates opportunities and creates an ethos. Also, we know that even within that ethos, it's not as if it's all smooth and that equity is something that is available for everyone. So I want to say sociologically that those are issues that every country struggles with. And we have our own. And so does any country which has any country actually does, all societies do have inequities, and there's always a struggle within to close those gaps. But that's the way it is. Coming to Indian Americans, it is a favorite subject of mine also for study because I watched very closely. I watched and studied the first generation like yourself. When I say first generation, I mean after the Nationality Act and so on, the doctors, academics, the scientists, and so on and so forth. And we know that they did exceedingly well in many, many domains, finance, tech, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the political space was the last bastion that was left. And that first generation did begin in some small ways to to be donors and so on. I know that you've yourself delved a lot in philanthropy and supporting
and
leadership and
political
in
fundraising. I do.
Yes, I know that. But there have been not so many people in that generation who were interested in that. They were focusing on their children to say, go to MIT, go to Harvard, go to whatever. So they themselves were scientists and academics and so on. So their involvement in public life was minimal. The organizations that they were setting up were either sectarian or religious or cultural. And it was not really about lobbying, except for when a senator or congressman would come and visit them. And I have witnessed these developments myself. It was very exciting that I was there during those years from 2010 to 2017, when for the first time we had 5 people running for Congress who were Indian American. Not everybody was a winner, and that moved on gradually. There was Ami Bera, there was Tulsi Gabbard, who was a Hindu, and for the first time took her oath on the Hindu scripture, on the Bhagavad Gita.
She's not quite Hindu. Her mom is Hindu.
Well,
I just want to make sure that you understand she's not quite Hindu.
So I want to say that that's what she says when she would stand up and say she's Hindu American. I'm saying she's registered somewhere as Hindu American. I'm saying that. I'm not taking sides. As a researcher, that's the advantage I have of being able to observe and see and make the commentary without actually having personal views on whether that is a valid claim or legitimacy or otherwise. And then, of course, that from that point to be the situation where we have not only the Samosa caucus, but that everybody, each one of them actually won and came back. So, Raja Krishnamurthy, Ami Bera, Pramila Jayapal, I was delighted to meet all of them and listen to many of their talks when they were running for office. The Biden administration also, as you said, has 15 to 17 people who are of Indian American origin in key positions. So absolutely, I think this has been a steady development that it's the second generation, really, the children who were born in the US. And the children born in the US really have very different perspectives. So
very well
I
said.
think I think their engaging with politics and policy was something that they could do from that generation because they went to schools there. And, I have many stories about how I connect that. But I think the movement towards engaging with policy and politics is now steady and strong.
So you already talked about the second generation of Indian Americans in terms of integration, identity. So and the culture differences. So I don't think that will be the topic I want to talk about. But I do want to talk about what you have done in terms of your work and studies on Indian Jews in Israel, because you lived in Israel and Ambassador Singh was an ambassador of India to Israel. Do you think they're fully integrated into Israeli society and they do not face hostility and prejudice and racism? And let me ask you another question. Are the Indian Jews in Israel are immigrants from the India basically come from Cochin, as I understand, from Kerala and Maharashtra, and which part of Israel they are settled, and do you know any notable people there are of Indian Jews, and how they have adjusted themselves in Israel, considering the cultural and socioeconomic differences?
Frank, that's my entire book.
You have written, yeah, thank you.
Yes, and I wrote the book because I was so fascinated when I arrived in Israel and I met Indian Jews. I was so fascinated to see this identity of being Indian and being Israeli. And that's the name of my book. I did a lot of book talks across the US, so I do want to say a little bit that the Indian Jews have always been a little invisible. And that even across the US, I saw that the Jewish communities of Indian origin actually don't go to many of the synagogues that I saw Ashkenazis going to. But anyway, that's a separate conversation. I want to say a little bit about my work on the Indian Jews. I was looking at the first generation. And the reason I was looking at the first generation there is because I thought that their stories it would soon be too late to collect their stories. Because when I interviewed them, they were already in their 60s. And many of them were gone by the time I actually finished the book. So I was speaking to people. I did 125 interviews. I traveled across Israel, which is not a huge country, but I went to small towns to pick up the stories, and people connected me to other people. So as a result of that, I was able to get the stories of migration of people who had spent their childhood and young adulthood in India and had come either as young mothers and fathers with their families, or had come in their 30s, or had come in their 40s. So the adjustment for that segment was very hard. There were certain stereotypes that these people from India may not be so well educated because they're coming from a poor country. That led to a lot of classifications when they were settled as large segments. They were settled on the periphery, on the Israeli periphery, not the main cities. Now, many communities that were stuck there were unable to migrate to the center where the jobs were, and they were stuck in many of the jobs that were not well paying. And these are all stories that were narrated to me, and there were many of them for me to be able to cross-check that. What that did was it got a generation stuck in the opportunities for the next generation didn't quite happen the same way. Now, this you would understand is the opposite of what happened in the US. You could start in Arkansas and you could be in Washington, DC, and then your kids could go to New York and live there, and you could move to Westchester or Greenwich or wherever you wanted. So you could do all of that in like 20 years or less. So because the Israeli state welcomed people and gave them citizenship as they entered, it looked after them, gave them insurance, gave them all the benefits. It also chose where it was going to settle you. And very often that meant that you got stuck. And to me, that was a fascinating difference from the way other Indian communities have settled in other parts of the world. So mobility was stuck because of spatial issues. I want to say that even as many of those stories recounted were about several hardships that they went through, economic, I have to say that I didn't meet a single person who said, I'm sorry, I migrated.
Oh, okay.
There were no regrets at all. Are they integrated? Yes. It took them a while, but they are integrated. Were there issues of acceptance? Yes, there were. There were some rabbis who refused to marry a Bnei Israel Indian Jew to a white Ashkenazi girl. Okay. And there were many such instances, but they were resolved at the political level and over time socially as well. There are three major Indian Jewish communities. I just want to say that. Kochinis are the smallest. The Bnei Israel who came from Bombay, Ahmedabad, Pune, were the largest community.
Maharashtra, are you talking about?
Maharashtra, Gujarat. They were the largest community in the Western India. And the second one were the Baghdadi Jews, who were of Baghdadi origin and had escaped the pogroms and settled in Calcutta. And they were business people who had families across the trading routes. Rangoon, Calcutta, Singapore, Hong Kong. It's a fascinating community. So they were the Baghdadis, and the Kochinis were the smallest.
Okay.
Have I taken too much time?
No, you have not taken too much time. So I will, before I close my conversation, I want to talk to you about the book that you've written on American missionaries in South Asia. Can you tell us a little bit about this book that you have wrote, and what did the missionary do in South Asia? And do you think they were mostly Protestants or they were Catholic? They arrived in United States, from United States to South Asia.
Okay, so the genesis of this book, and this was my PhD, which I was offered by Routledge to publish it. It was born out of the intersection of a personal family history and my scholarly training. All through the scholarly training I had, it was about cultural imperialism of the missionaries and how colonialism had appropriated everything and how there was resistance to it. And I had a mother who had studied at Kinnaird College, Lahore. And through her friends and other people that I met who had studied at colleges like IT College in Lucknow or Kinnaird College in Lahore or the Vellore Medical College in the South, all had wonderful nostalgic stories to tell about their mentors, about the missionary women who created and ran these campuses. And I thought there was something complex there. There was a dissonance between the way I was trained to look at colonialism and the experience of these women across cultures within the same educational campuses. And that became the reason for me to go out and do the research. Most of the research was done in the missionary archives in America, because I was looking at American women missionaries and women missionaries. It was very specific because I wanted to see how gender created these secluded spaces where many of these women, like my own mother, were first generation college going. And so they felt that their lives had been transformed as a result of this education. They knew of the Christian ethos around, they knew that there was a chapel, they would sometimes go there, but they didn't report any discomfort with the evangelical mission. They were very comfortable with going and celebrating Diwali at home and singing Christmas carols on campus. Oh, wow. And I wanted to report that as the way that things have always been in India, is that to go and visit people from other faiths on their festivals was something that we grew up with. So I wanted to capture this. So I did ethnographic interviews with many of these older women who remembered their time at that time with those campuses. All of these campuses were set up by single American women who were educationists. And they were all Protestants, because the Catholics would have had much more restrictions to set up, and they would have been more.
The Catholics did come from Portugal and Spain in the 16th and 17th century when the Portugal captured Goa.
So I want to say that in India, actually, we had a lot more Irish. They were spread, the Jesuits, the Irish, there were lots of those orders that were spread across India.
Very well said. So thank you very much, Dr. Singh, for your time. And this is Frank Islam wishing you a great week. And thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. This is Frank Islam wishing you a great week.